Just because a listening is authentic or a reading is authentic doesn't mean it's interesting, doesn't mean it's well written. Talking about text, of course. Doesn't mean it's representative of the genre.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our premiere episode of From Book to Classroom in 2020. And to open the season, we have here with us Luiz Otávio Barros.
Hi.
How are you, Luiz?
I'm good. You?
Good. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Luiz has been involved in ELT since 1990, right? And you're also now a teacher trainer and coursebook author, right?
Yeah.
And this is actually the reason why we wanted to talk to you. Mm-hmm. Lots of teachers have been discussing using coursebooks in their lessons, and we have a myriad of coursebooks out there. But if you look at the comments that teachers make, especially in Facebook groups where they go for advice, you see lots of things that give us some indications of important topics to be discussed. I selected a couple of those topics, and one of the comments that's very common to see in those groups is teachers asking if other teachers rather use online resources or if they rather use coursebooks. We have a myriad of online resources out there, but there's no rigid structure and sequencing. Whereas in coursebook, you find that sequencing is all thought. You have different kinds of resources.
There's a lot of online stuff out there made available for free, but not all of it is edited. And I think it's really important for teaching materials to be edited. It's really important for the writer to have another pair of eyes. Look at the material and offer constructive criticism and concrete feedback. It's important to have someone who can say, Luis, this doesn't seem to work, or this works well, or don't you think this belongs at the beginning rather than at the end? Or wouldn't it be better if you did X instead? Or even language-wise, this sentence doesn't sound natural, maybe you should rephrase it. I know that whoever writes these materials, they mean well, but it's really important for resources to go through some sort of vetting process. And that's my quibble with, the kinds of PDFs circulating. So if you feel like using any of those, just be very critical of what's out there.
And it also poses teachers this challenge to actually spot what's good material and what's bad material, and useful and not so useful material. Having a lot may not be the best option.
Yeah, because sometimes less is more. Yeah, I'm a little skeptical of the usefulness of these resources. Really, some of them are good.
Yeah.
But not all of them.
Something else that also comes up a lot is teachers asking, can you recommend a course book that has interesting topics to be discussed?
Oh, yeah.
Is it something that we really should be focusing most on, focusing our energy on interesting topics to be discussed? Are there other things that teachers need to look for?
This is complicated. What appeals to you as a teacher may not necessarily appeal to your students, right? And vice versa. So it's hard to assume that they're gonna like the stuff that you find interesting, right? So that's one thing. Two, within the safe zone of ELT topics, the things that we can talk about, there's hardly anything that hasn't been talked about. We're talking about food, travel, you name it, right? The safe topics.
Yes.
So anything that could be included in a course book has been included in a course book. So as an author, it's really up to you to find an unusual, a quirky angle of whatever topics you've chosen to talk about. So say you're writing a lesson on foods. Very often what you do as an author is you go about trying to find unusual, quirky angles of this topic. Like you look for a story of a man who ate 30 hamburgers in 1 hour. And you hope and pray that the students will like it too. So you're kind of stuck topic-wise, right? 3, I think it's important to look at the word discuss a little more closely. If you think of it, a typical A1, A2 students, maybe they're not ready yet to discuss complex topics, complex things, you know? Especially if in Portuguese they're very fluent, very articulate. Once a student told me, I'm very persuasive in Portuguese, and when I speak English, I sound like a 5-year-old, and it's really frustrating. And that raises an important question. Shouldn't we perhaps focus on situation rather than topics, you know? Things for them to do with English rather than things for them to talk about. I'm talking about those A-B exchanges, you know, through which students can actually get things done with the language. And they were very popular in the early 80s and late 70s. And then grammar made a huge comeback in 1986 when Headway came along.
Yeah.
And those A-B exchanges were sort of thrown to the wayside of mainstream syllabuses. So I wish they could have a little more prominence in A1 and A2 books. So when you're choosing a book, besides asking yourself if the topics are appealing, maybe another question should be, are the situations plausible and relevant and realistic? So that's something to keep in mind. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, really, because what makes a good course book? And there's so many criteria here to keep in mind that we could go on for hours if we were to talk about all the criteria that you need to keep in mind in choosing a course book. But here's a rule of thumb. Sit down and plan a lesson using that course book. Plan the lesson as if you were going to teach it tomorrow. Try to work out the answers. Read the tape script. Plan the actual lesson. See how long it takes you. And the less you have to skip activities, the less you have to create activities, the less you have to shuffle activities around, the better. Otherwise, what's the point of using a course book if you have to rewrite all the lessons? There's an old mantra, of course, according to which the course book is only a guide and teachers should pick and choose and use the course book sensibly. That's easier said than done. Because when you're planning a lesson and the whole lesson revolves, for example, around the text, what happens if you replace the text or the dialogue? The whole lesson falls apart. Because very often the examples in the grammar box are taken from the text. Very often the gap fills use the same sort of context.
Everything's tied up.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So if you choose another text or another dialogue, chances are that your lesson will fall apart at the seams. So try to choose a book that you won't have to rewrite.
Something else that comes along as well is teachers are constantly looking for materials to meet specific demands. Let's say, for instance, can anyone recommend a book to help prepare students to sit a master's degree proficiency exam at a certain university? How specific do you believe course books need to be to attend the demand?
If anything, I think course books are getting more and more general, you know, because they're very expensive to write. And the actual course book, the student's book, is only the tip of the iceberg. There's the workbook and the teacher's book and all the apps and all the videos and all the tests and all the interactive whiteboard. We're talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Naturally, publishers want those books to sell as well as possible.
Want to reach a progressively larger audience.
Yeah, there are very few niche materials out there. And I don't think that's a trend that will change in the near future. No. And it's really up to the teacher to write supplementary materials. And I go back to what I said about editing. So if you have to write your own material, get somebody to look at your work. Get an editor or maybe another writer to look at what you've done and comment.
I've also seen some teachers asking in those groups about course books references or course books to help them work with C2 students, like highly advanced students. Do you believe that course books are able to reach those levels?
Okay, so first of all, why are there no C2 books on the market? I don't think it's because C2 is inherently a no-book sort of level. I think there are not very few, there are no C2 books whatsoever on the market because it's a very, very small slice of the pie. No one in their right mind, and I'm talking about the big publishers, would want to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in such a tiny slice of the pie. In fairness to publishers, of course, there are proficiency books out there, CP books, right?
Yeah.
Which in theory are at C2. But the key word here is theory. Because when you write a proficiency book, you have a certain number of pages. You have all your exam skills and exam strategies that you need to prioritize. So when you have 230 pages, you have space constraints and a whole exam preparation syllabus to focus on. Something's got to give. And guess what? It's language. So I'm not a big fan of exam preparation books in general, with a few exceptions, because I don't think they do a very good job of improving students' language. Right? I think there is a tension there between exam preparation and language development, right? So the proficiency books are C2 in theory, I think, but I would love to see a real C2 book on the market. Now, back to your question, is it worth it? Grammar-wise, it would be hard to have a C2 grammar syllabus in a book, because all the advanced grammar structures like inversions and inverted conditionals and special use of mobiles, those are dealt with at C1.
C1 books,
so
sometimes B2 books.
Exactly. So what's left for the author to include in a book like that grammar-wise? So I think it's up to the teacher to cater to individual needs throughout the course. But in terms of lexis, in terms of writing, in terms of register, and in terms of formulaic language, there's a lot that we can do at those levels, especially formulaic language that books in general tend to pay very little attention to, with a few exceptions, of course.
Something else that teachers bring up a lot in those groups too is, does anyone know a course book that works with authentic materials predominantly or only authentic materials? And I think the underlying discussion here is, are authentic materials something that teachers have to be solely looking for in a course book?
In the early days, the communicative era, the word authentic was such a buzzword. And authentic materials were all the rage, and materials had to be authentic, right? Because communication had to be authentic. But it's not that simple. Just because the listening is authentic or a reading is authentic doesn't mean it's interesting, doesn't mean it's well written, talking about text, of course, doesn't mean it's representative of the genre, right?
Yeah.
Which theoretically is one of the reasons why one would choose to use authentic materials, right? Exposing students to that particular genre. And just because listening or reading is authentic doesn't mean they're at the right level. And that's really important, because if you were trained in the communicative era, you were taught that what you need to grade is the task, not the text, which means that you can use anything under the sun with your students as long as you can grade the activity. But it's not that simple. You don't want to expose students to material which is way above their level of competence, right? And so say you find a TED Talk that you fall in love with. It happens to talk about the exact same thing you're talking about in class. And you tell yourself, oh my God, I'm going to use this TED Talk. And then you realize that it's way above what students can understand. I think there are a number of reasons why you shouldn't use it. One, it's very frustrating for students to be able to understand 30% of a talk, even if they get the true or false right. Number one. Number two, you're going to find it hard to write comprehension questions that go beyond just comprehension questions that really check whether the students have understood. So you're going to be saddled with questions like, is the woman for or against whatever it is that she's talking about? How many arguments does she list? Exactly. That can be very frustrating for students. I remember once a student told me, okay, teacher, I got all the true or false questions right, but I understood like 20% of the video, and this I can do at home. And I was like, oh my God, she's right. And there's another problem. But say you want to use that TED Talk, you're dead set on using it. And you don't mind not going beyond general comprehension because it's not really a listening activity. You want to use the video as a springboard for further discussion. That doesn't work either, because when students discuss whatever it is that you want them to discuss, they'll be drawing on what they already know. They'll be drawing on the ideas they already have, not on the things that were said in the video, because they couldn't understand them. There are like dozens of reasons why we should grade not only the task, but the source material itself. Yeah, so choose carefully. When you're looking for authentic texts, sometimes a non-authentic but authentic sounding text can do wonders. A text that you can doctor, including whatever language you want them to notice. If a video is too hard, don't use it, however appealing it may be. And if you're choosing, say, an article, if it's too difficult, adapt it. Try to doctor the text. Yeah. Make it easier. Keep it authentic looking and authentic sounding, but make it easier. Water it down a little. And remember, you can doctor your texts in any way that you like. You can include language that you want them to notice. You can get rid of language that you know they're going to ask you about, language that is not particularly useful. Authentic materials, yes, with caution.
This next comment, I seriously think you've seen it somewhere. Can anyone share the PDF?
No.
Or can anyone share the class audio of this book?
Yeah.
So how do you feel when you see something like that, and what are your 2 cents on this?
I don't know what to say. Just don't do it. It's not ethical. I know that books are expensive, and in this economy, there are other issues. It's my livelihood at stake. When you're writing an international course book, not necessarily an international course book, but a course book for a big publisher, they give you a list of topics to include. The big topics like food, or travel, or family, right? And it's really up to you to find all the angles to make it interesting. They give you a list of grammar points, and you need to spend a couple of months working out how to match the topics to the grammar.
Months.
Yeah. Mapping out the syllabus is the most important step in the whole process. If you don't do it right, chances are that halfway through the process, you might have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. So you need to spend a couple of months at least mapping out the syllabus and matching grammar points to topics and ideas for vocabulary. With vocabulary, I have a little more leeway in terms of, one, the kinds of words that you're going to include, B, how many words you're going to include, and C, the sequence. But one way or another, it's really important, again, to map out the syllabus as carefully as you can. And that's where the experienced editor can be really helpful. Somebody who can actually guide you through the process and offer constructive feedback. And then, when you start writing the lessons, when you write the first draft of the lesson, you've got to look at your first draft really as a first draft.
Hardly it's going to come out the same way.
Exactly. It's really a work in progress, because you're going to get lots and lots and lots of feedback. And you've got to look at that feedback with an open mind and with an open heart. And you've got to trust your editor. And you've got to be willing to give things a try. You've got to be willing to take their feedback on board, even if you disagree with parts of it. You've got to convince yourself that as a writer, you have blind spots that you're oblivious to. Well, of course you're oblivious to them, they're blind, right? It really takes an editor, a good editor, to point them out to you, to shed light on things that you might have been unaware of. Then you write a second draft, and it gets better. And then you write a third draft, and maybe a fourth, maybe a fifth draft, till your lesson is as close to perfect as possible.
And here we're talking about a lesson.
Oh yeah. So
let alone a course book.
We're talking about a lesson.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness it's really up to the publishing house to take care of the artwork, to take care of the recordings, to seek permissions, right? There's a lot that you don't need to do. It's a very time consuming.
Yeah, and course books tend, every day more now, they tend to offer additional resources, right?
Exactly.
So you've got the workbook, you've got the classware, you've got the class audio, you've got some of them offer interactive boards.
Exactly.
And stuff.
And you have very tight deadlines, because unless you turn in lesson 5 by Monday at 5 o'clock, the guy in charge of the workbook may not be able to write the workbook. And the person in charge of the app may not be able to write the app.
Well, there's the app as well.
Exactly, if you start to fall behind. But here's something I've learned. It's not your baby. Once it's out there, it takes on a life of its own. You want your lesson to be as close to perfect as realistically possible, so that it can help teachers and students alike. You want your book to enhance learning, not to hinder it. It's not about you as an author and your ego and your principles it's about
the student.
It's about the end user. It's about the teacher and student. So leave your ego at the door and keep in mind that you're going to hear, Luis, this doesn't seem to work, far more often than this is really good. Something else I've learned throughout the process is that when you offer feedback, which I've done on a number of occasions, playing different roles, series editor, informal editor, peer, is that it's better to frame your feedback in terms of, this works, I don't think this will work, rather than, this is good, this is not good. Because when as an author, when you hear this is good, this is not good, it's personal. Hearing this is good is tantamount to hearing you're a good writer. Whereas if an editor says, I don't think this will work, you're looking at the activity on its own terms, as a product, not as your baby, not as
a part of you.
Not as a part of you. It's not a part of you.
What are your plans now for the near future?
Yeah, I'm working on a reference book for B2 and C1 students, so it's coming out late July, early August, I hope. It will be available on Amazon. It's my second self-published book. And I've been very lucky with the academic phrase book, so I hope the second one will live up to it. And after the second one, God knows what's in store for me. Maybe another book with a major publisher, maybe another self-published book, who knows? But I'm focusing on the second one coming out in July now. I think you're gonna like it.
I'm sure I will. I'm sure we will. I can't thank you enough for being here with us today. Remember to subscribe to our channel. Remember to like this video if you enjoyed it. And stay tuned for our next episode of From Book to Classroom. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you.
Thank you.